In this video, I want to go over the signs. By signs, I mean the plus or minus signs of the trig functions in each quadrant. Now, I went ahead and wrote on here the coordinate point definitions that we saw in a previous video, which are going to be important to understanding the signs, positive or negative, of each of these trig functions. So, in quadrant 1, here in quadrant 1, we have an angle value that is between 0 and 90 degrees. And in quadrant 1, it is true that the x value is always bigger than 0, the y value is always bigger than 0, the r value is always bigger than 0. In other words, we're always going positive on the x, we're always going positive on the y, and any directed line segment out into this quadrant would always be positive, which would be like our radius value, okay? Let's go ahead and do this for all 4 quadrants, and then we'll go ahead and figure out the sign values of each of these. In quadrant 2, our angle is going to be between 90 degrees and 180 degrees. Here, the x value is less than 0. That means it's negative because we're going to the left. The y value is greater than 0 because we're going up. And the r value, which is, again, like the radius of a circle, that radius is always going to be positive. In quadrant number 3, down here, our angles are between 180 degrees and 270 degrees. Here, the x value, we're going left, so the x is less than 0. We're coming down, so the y value is less than 0. And the r value, which is still the radius of a circle, that's still going to be greater than 0, always. Finally, in quadrant 4, here our angles are between 270 degrees and 360 degrees. Here the x's are greater than 0 because we're going to the right. The y values are less than 0 because we're going down. And the r value is still greater than 0. All right, so that's all kind of the background information that we need for this. Now we're ready to do the signs of each trig function. So in quadrant 1, the sign of any angle in quadrant 1, well, since sine is y over r, y is positive, r is positive, so we're taking a positive number divided by a positive number. That means the sign is greater than 0. It's positive. The cosine of an angle, well, that uses the x and the r. Again, positive divided by positive, so that's greater than 0. And the tangent of an angle, that's y over x. That's a positive divided by a positive, which is greater than 0. So what we find that in quadrant 1, all trig functions are positive, okay? Now it gets more interesting the rest of the way. In quadrant number 2, the sine value. So sine uses y over r, and y is positive, r is positive. So 2 positives are positive, greater than 0. Cosine of an angle in this quadrant, however, we're using x over r, and x is negative. So now we have a negative number divided by a positive number, which is negative, less than 0. And the tangent, that uses y and x, which uses a positive and negative number, which is negative. So in quadrant number 2, only the sine is positive. I say only, but it's technically sine and cosecant. Its reciprocal would also be positive, but sine is positive there. Quadrant 3. So here we've got, let's do sine first. Sine is y, and y is negative. So y over r would be less than 0, negative. Cosine, cosine's x over r. So x is negative, r is positive. That's also negative. Tangent, y over x. Y and x are both negative. A negative divided by a negative is positive. So in quadrant 3, only tangent. Tangent and its reciprocal cotangent would be positive. Finally, quadrant 4. So here the sine of an angle using the y over r, that's a negative over positive, which is negative. Cosine using x over r, that's a positive over positive, that is positive. And the tangent, y over x, that's a negative over positive, which is negative. So in this quadrant, only the cosine is positive. Cosine and, of course, secant, its reciprocal. Okay, so summarize this. I have an acronym that I've always used. If I take the first letter of each of these, ASTC, right? So if I do that, you're welcome to make your own acronym. Sometimes I find students make very humorous ones, but I always told my students in trigonometry that I expect all students to take calculus. All students take calc, ASTC. And if you just remember that, ASTC from quadrants 1, 2, 3 through 4, then you'll remember which trig functions, all sine, tangent, cosine, are positive in those respective quadrants.